Peter Katz.
Here we are. This is a big moment, right?
This is a very big moment, Peter. Yes, indeed.
I feel like we've been threatening to do this for a long time. I remember going on a late night walk with you in Halifax, and we were like, we should do this.
I loved the idea that we were just like throwing big wishes out in the air in that moment. And I never would have imagined all of a sudden now we're here in the moment that we wished for, as you said, back in Halifax, which brings me a lot of joy and excitement and feeling a little bit nervous, to be honest.
Me too, but I'm feeling excited, and I had a couple of ideas. We didn't talk about this in advance, Robyne, but I had a couple of ideas. I know the theme or the name of this podcast is going to be In Time. And I thought, given our lives and the ways that you and I tend to move through space and time, if you're open to this little tradition I'm proposing, First of all, actually, the first tradition is I think we should just take a breath together. What do you think about that?
I like that idea.
And then anybody else who's listening can also take a breath with us.
That was like my first deep breath of the day, and it's late in the day.
Yeah. I took a couple of deep breaths. I had a keynote early this morning after some fiascos. So I had to take a few deep breaths in order to do that. But it's amazing how you can go without taking a deep breath and you're, well into your day. So I enjoyed that one. So the idea that I had, Robyne, seeing as we're this idea of In Time, is we could maybe start each episode beyond the surprise question idea that we have.
Yes.
Of just asking each other, like, where are you? What happened right before and what's happening right after, just for a sense of context. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great suggestion. All in.
Okay. So where are you? What happened right before and what's happening right after?
Okay. So where am I right now is I'm in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. What's happening right after is I'm about to do this like gigantic keynote for RBC with all of their leaders. And what happened right before this is I was talking with Hunter, my oldest, trying to figure out who's picking up who tonight back home in Peterborough to make sure no child gets left at school. So he's filling in for me. So we were just making a plan as to who's picking up who and who has to be where they have to be. So that was happening literally right before I jumped on this call.
Amazing. The many hats of Dr. Robyne Hanley-Dafoe.
And how about you, Peter? What were you doing before and where are you going and where are you?
So I'm currently in Vancouver, North Vancouver to be specific. I'm in one of two hotel rooms that I rented. I had rented one hotel room last night and I had a virtual keynote right before this conversation. And I realized that the internet was not good enough for that. And so I rented another hotel room and hauled my stuff and so I had a bit of a morning this morning, but it was actually a beautiful keynote. There's something kind of special that happens when you're like, I'm going to say depleted, but also I think what comes with that is this need to be actually super focused. I remember Jeff Buckley, one of my favorite artists, talking about how he would play like 3 concerts in a night. And by the time he got to the 3rd concert, like that's where something new and special would happen because he just had to kind of reach this new level of flow or presence. And so I kind of felt that this morning. So that's kind of what happened right before. And then right after this, I am, I'm squeezing in a very quick coffee with a friend as I move back to the other hotel. And then I have a keynote for CAA, who have come in handy many times in my life as touring musicians. So I'm going to just shower them with love and gratitude. So that's me right now.
I love that. And Peter, I'm just mindful of the folks who joined us to kind of maybe give a little bit of like level setting as to like, okay, first of all, why are you two having this conversation and like what's going on? I just want to include and invite people to be part of this conversation. And is it okay that I just take a moment to just kind of give a little bit of like, hey, what's the intention? What are we trying to do here? So thank you for that. So I can share with you one of the questions I get often asked, and I'm pretty confident Peter does too, is kind of this idea about like, do you have a podcast? Where do we get more information? And so often I feel as though that we have to find these like really formal channels of sharing what we know or sharing our knowledge, or perhaps it's, for me coming from a background in the academy, a lot of my knowledge was like behind the walls of the academy, like physical bricks and mortar. And one of the things that I've been super curious about is how do we just like bring things into a more accessible way where people, they want to kind of get maybe a less kind of polished, less formal view of how we come upon some of our ideas in our work. We come from very unique backgrounds, yet I feel as though there's this like really cool place where we're both meeting one another, given that we're both doing public speaking and we're part of that landscape. So the idea was that we can share with you some of our like just-in-time learning. Like, what are some of the things that we're learning about? What are things that we're inspired by? What are the things that we're thinking about? But really create a place where some of that just-in-time learning that Peter's learning about in his ecosystem, where he navigates and where I navigate, we can actually find a place to capture it. Now, Peter, I'm welcome you to jump in there if there's anything else that you would want to add or to, add or think about on those lines.
No, I think you just said that so beautifully and eloquently, and for me, like I know when we were talking about this, like you and I, we work on projects together. We sometimes present together, and we end up like I love the conversations that we have as we're preparing those things, and we'll often kind of deviate into other topics, and there's always this like often this great synergy, or you often have all of these like great nuggets on the science behind something that we're talking about. So I guess I just sort of selfishly wanted, like, I get so much out of those conversations. And so I was like, well, I love the idea of that kind of spilling over where other people can kind of get the goodness of Robyne and kind of just let people in on those conversations. Because I like you just said, I think we're often just talking about things that are emerging for us. And I know for me, like in my musical background, especially there's such a process to like put something out into the world. Even with a new talk, you're just like working stuff and there's like this long tail to it. And I remember when I would put out albums, sometimes by the time it was wrapped in shrink wrap, I was feeling like a totally different set of things. It was a bit of a miracle if I still resonated with it by the time it got released. So I'm really excited about the idea of being able to just put things out with less of an extended lag between kind of idea. And it kind of reminds me of why I loved the live show experience, because something would happen in the world that day and I could say something about it that night. And maybe I'd written a new song that there was just this immediacy to it. So I love that about what we're doing here.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And thank you for the kind words and how you've braided that together. And the other part too, that I really hope that the listeners, the people who want to come with us to these conversations can see is almost like this permission giving that like we don't have to wait because there's no perfect time. And I think that was one of the reasons why we kind of landed on this idea of like in time to showing up as we are, where we are, with what's going on, because I feel in our society and our culture that we have to get like everything perfect and right and polished before we share it, because if not, we're showing vulnerability and messiness and process. And we often look at like after pictures, but we don't always see the journey pictures. And so for me, one of the things I wanted so much to create was something that is just real and it's authentic. And it's just like, as we both know, neither of us had time for this today, given the fact that, heck, I'm in Ottawa, forgot my microphone, forgot all the things that I needed to be able to join this. You've gone through an adventure with your 2 hotel rooms in Vancouver. It would have been easier to say, not today. This isn't the right time. And again, I just really hope to set this as very much that gentle invitation or that example that there's never a right time. where everything's going to make sense. And often our learning is on the fly. And I hope we're creating a space where people can, also give themselves permission that, we do the best that we can each and every day, but the intention matters. And so I think, again, just kind of creating these conversations in real time, but also recognizing there's never a perfect time. And it's sometimes we just have to just take that leap and trust that it's all going to work out.
I love that, Robyne. I love that so much. I was preparing for another keynote the other day, and I got to interview this older gentleman who worked in mutual insurance, a lovely man. And he said this thing about sort of his life motto. And he said, I just do the best I can with what I have to offer today. And that the second half of that line was special to me. Cause I the idea of doing the best you can is something that I think we've all heard. But this idea of saying, well, with what I have today, I just inherently hear this idea of actually checking in with yourself. Like, what do I have today? And then also this idea of like having permission to give, even though it might not be what you had to give yesterday, like there's always something to give. And so, I appreciated that.
Oh, and Peter, I love that because we talk about that in our research around this idea of doing that little bit of a self check-in in the morning. And we do this idea, what we call like energy and task matching. So when you wake up first thing in the morning to actually just kind of like check in with yourself and be like, okay, so like optimally, like what level of energy do I have to offer my loved ones, my community, my job, my work today? And what we've been able to see is that so often many of us feel this pressure that we have to be 100%, give it our best every single time we show up. But that's actually not realistic. By our very nature, our energy and our focus is going to ebb and flow. So even, for example, today is a Tuesday, and it's that idea that when I wake up in the morning, I ask myself, okay, do I need a tender Tuesday today where maybe I'm going to go like 30% because I've had a really, really kind of wild, unruly Monday and I need to just walk gently the next day? Or do I need like a really thrilling Tuesday where I have to get in there, high levels of energy? But what we do is when we match it accordingly, like when we're honest with ourselves and realize, what do I have to offer? What we see is that we don't go into this place of depletion or kind of running that risk of burnout. Because often what happens if you're at like a 30, but you give it 100%, you're actually stealing the energy of tomorrow to get through today. And that's a vicious cycle. So I love what that gentleman shared with you. And my invitation for people that are listening is like, think about different ways of how do I like set myself up for success to match the energy I have and the task at hand.
You see, this is what you get when you're friends with Dr. Robyne Hanley-Dafoe. These are the brilliant things that I get to just sit there and listen to. I'm like, the world needs to hear these conversations and your wisdom. So thank you, Robyne, for that insight. I always just appreciate. I sort of just walk through the world a little more like just kind of on like intuition, and then you're always like, well, here's why. And I love that. I actually quote you now in my own talks because I'll literally be like, here's this thing that I do. And my friend, Dr. Robyne Hanley-Dafoe says, this is why this actually works. So I'm glad that people can get some taste of that.
I love it. I love it. Well, I love also how the fact that like none of this is planned, none of it is like kind of scripted in terms of what are we going to talk about, but this is just this this unfolding that so often you and I fall upon or we experience or it comes upon us. And this is what I'm super excited to share with people. And my idea is that, when you are able to join us for, again, just half an hour, it doesn't have to be a big commitment, but join us, be part of this conversation because we want to share with you that action, right? Those actionable items that help us feel better. And what's so beautiful about Peter and your contribution and how I always feel, Peter, you're just like this like amazing pause button for my nervous system, where every time we chat and I hear about the music, or even when you're just strumming along in your music in the background when we're having these conversations. It just like awakens a different part of my brain that so often is like kind of on the back burner because I'm trying to do all the work. I'm trying to get everything done. And you have just this amazing capacity to like invite us to like just slow down, kind of take that deep breath, kind of get into our feels, so to speak. And it's actually where I find renewal. It's where I find rest. It's where I find almost as if it's a place where giving each other permission that, our feelings are so important in our work, our conversations. And when we're in alignment and kind of in time with what's mattering most, we start to show up differently in our lives in a more meaningful and purpose-filled way, which I really love. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, Robyne, we did not plan our content. That's part of our plan, is to not plan our content. But I guess we have a couple of traditions. I mean, yes. We'll see if they become traditions if we repeat them. But we had talked in advance that we would spring a surprise question on each other every episode. And so, do you think it's time for that segment?
That is exactly the time for that question. I'm excited.
I want there to be, I want to write like some segment music, like Robyne and Peter, surprise question. And then,
I say yes.
We'll work on that. Okay.
There you go.
So Robyne, would you, are you of the heart and mind to go first or second? Would you like to ask the question or be asked the question?
I am going to ask the question, because I know your question is going to be awesome. And then I'm going to feel self-conscious about my question. And then I'm going to want to change my question. So I'm going to go first, if that's okay. Yeah.
100%.
Okay. So as Peter said, one of the things we're thinking about is like, we need a few little anchors for consistency, given that we aren't planning any of our content and dialogue sharing. So as Peter said, the one that we're doing is just asking each other any just random question. And we invite you to think about the question as well. You can answer it, and you're welcome to reach out. You can share with us what your response to the question would be. We want you to be part of this. And the question I was like kind of curious about, and I know with Peter, we can go so deep into feels, and we can also like play in this other place. So the first question, I wanted it to just kind of just no pressure. So here's your question, Peter. Okay. Enough of an introduction to your question. Peter, what is the longest lineup you've ever stand in, or you've ever like waited for something? What's the longest lineup, or what's the longest thing you've ever like waited for in your life?
I had two visions that came to me as you asked that question. So the one that immediately came to me was Costco at the beginning of the pandemic. I remember like we all of us outside of Costco lived through like an entire weather system.
Yes.
I mean, it was hours, and there was snow, there was sun, there was rain, there was just an entire experience that happened. Yeah. This was like at the very, very, very beginning of the pandemic. And so that's what came to mind. And then the other thing that came to mind was when I was a kid, and I'm shocked that my parents would let me do this, but I would go to the mall, like to the Ticketmaster outlet when you had to physically go to buy the tickets. And I would spend the night at the mall so I could be in line for when the ticket window had opened at like 11 a.m. or whatever it was. And that was either for, often for concert tickets, every now and then for hockey tickets. And so I would just like hang out at the mall for literally like 12 hours, like through the night. Yeah. So I guess it wasn't the longest line because I was towards the front of it, but it was certainly a long waiting experience for something.
Oh my gosh, Peter, my heart is like bursting because, and so as people may know I have 3 teenagers. We have 3 teenagers, not you, Jeff and I have 3 teenagers. And so I have a Costco story, which is like, we revisit all the time. Again, right at the heart of the pandemic, same thing. It was like blistering cold. I was standing there with my oldest, who at the time was 16, Hunter's 18 now, but we were standing there and we were freezing. We were not dressed for the elements. We had no idea that we were going to end up having to line up for like 2 hours. And they were letting people in these like sections, right? They'd be like, okay, the next 5 people can go in, the next, 10 people. Anyway, so I was at that tipping point where I'm like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And all of a sudden, this woman comes out of Costco who clearly had been there before, and all she was carrying was a cheesecake. And I remember looking at Hunter like my brain was not able to process the fact that like maybe it was someone's birthday and maybe that was the most important cheesecake that had to be in the world. And I don't mean to mean it with judgment, but like I was there trying to get like staples to feed children. And this woman comes out like she with this cheesecake. And I was just like, I felt ragey. Like I literally was just like, there needs to be a separate place for people who are buying cheesecakes. And so now every time I go to Costco, at some point we bring up that like, hey mom, don't freak out on anyone who has a cheesecake. And I didn't say anything. I internalized all of my frustrations, but I was having this moment where like, are you kidding me? Like, why is this happening? And why we're freezing and this woman gets to walk out with a cheesecake. So, yeah. And I have to tell you another full disclosure. I was like imagining like young Peter lining up at Ticketmaster wherever you were, whether it be in Montreal or wherever you were. And I was just so curious. I'm like, I wonder what that concert would have been that he like lined up for a really long time. So just so you know, that's where that question kind of hatched from.
Well, my favorite, that you mean that's what you thought of before you asked me before you heard my answer? Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
I was curious.
That's pretty special. And it was Montreal, and I was lining up either for Smashing Pumpkins, Radiohead. Those were my first concert ever was the Eagles. But yeah, I obviously loved music, still do clearly. Well, I love the question, Robyne. That was truly a surprise question, and nice to revisit both my youth and my Costco experience. I was not buying a cheesecake, so you can, if you think about caloric density, though, like pure survival, she's, that probably would have held her and her family up for a while. So,
so true, so true.
Okay, I have a question for you, Robyne. I guess I went a little deep, but it's just. I think it came from my experience over the last like 12 hours or so, or just being tested, and the question just kind of popped into my head. But I have a little invitation for you, Robyne, and actually this is an invitation for anybody listening as well. I've been studying mindfulness for the last several years, and I did this one particular course around this kind of like, it's like mindfulness or meditation, but it's witnessed by somebody else. It's called focusing. Yes. And at the beginning of that course, the teacher asked us a question, which I think the question was like, what does the word presence mean to you? Mm-hmm. And she added, though, this distinction as she asked the question. She said, or an invitation, really. And the invitation was to answer the question truly for the first time. Like, so we might all walk around with like, oh yeah, presence is this, presence is that, but to actually just pause and dip your bucket into the well and see what comes up, and allow yourself to be surprised by what comes up. Allow yourself to not know the answer to this question that you may have already answered before, you may have thought about before, but just like what comes up for you now. So are you cool with that invitation before I ask the question?
So into that. I think that, again, I just love the fact that it's like, you just gave us a tool to kind of knock ourselves out of autopilot, right? Because so often we just have like desired responses or socially like acceptable responses, or like what we think the other person wants us to say. As somebody who's recovering from the disease to please, I often try to think, what do they want to hear from me? So I love that invitation to actually like ground myself before, so I can listen to the question you're about to ask me and give you like that kind of like almost like that raw and real meet it for the first time and don't worry about all the other layers. I'm in.
Beautiful. And once again, Robyne, you've now given me reason why one of the things that I talk about in my talks is effective. I have this section where I talk about your lifelines, and that's kind of nurturing authentic relationship with people. And I give people this sentence to use, and the sentence is, "What's your update?" And the reason I use that sentence with my lifelines instead of "How's it going?" is because when you ask somebody "How's it going?" you get the autopilot answer. Whereas unless you're like a general in the military, you don't generally ask people, "What's your update?" It's like, it's not a normal thing to ask. But that for me and my lifelines is like a signal of, hey, I want the real fresh, present answer. So, so thank you for that.
Can I jump in really quick just to finish that thought? For me, it's kind of like with my team and I, we talk about this idea, but like when we're doing check-ins, it's like, how are you? And then everybody gives fine, good, tired, and busy, right? Those are kind of like almost like in Wheel of Fortune when you already have letters that they don't let you pick anymore because everybody picks the letters. And I remember watching Wheel of Fortune before that was the option, right? Before they're like, okay, don't even use these letters, pick new ones. I don't know if people know what I'm talking about. Do you know, Peter? You're like, maybe, Robyne. I don't.
No, yes.
They force you into like, don't use these letters because every single person picks these letters every single time. So they like spiced it up by finding words that don't always use them. Anyway, the point, I promise I'll get to it, is this idea of asking people like, how are you? You give the standard response, the good, busy, tired, fine. Okay. And then we go, okay, how are you really? And then that's when you get the barely holding on, exhausted, feeling a wee bit wobbly, like, good gosh, is it, when's it going to be the weekend? Like, we actually then get that realness when we kind of circle back and say, how are you? But then how are you really? So I think that's similar. We're going about it different ways, but with a similar intention of giving people permission to be honest with how they're feeling.
I mean, the answer could be, I actually just got an amazing deal on a cheesecake and I am feeling awesome. So you never know, right?
Yeah, you never know. You never know.
I
love it. Okay, I'm ready for your question.
Okay, Robyne. So here's my question for you that came to me. And the question is, what is one thing more than any other thing that you know to be true?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay, so I went shallow to cheesecake and tickets, and you literally went to like truth, deep philosophical, soul-filled truth. I love it. One of the things that I know to be true is that there is such thing as unconditional love, because I feel it from my 3 kids. I didn't understand unconditional love before, because I feel though, even in our partnerships, even in a lot of our relationships, it's like conditional love. It's like, I'll love you as long as you don't do this, or I love you as long as, like, that's the line. Like, there's always a line in so many of our relationships. And it wasn't until I was so fortunate to be a mother that I realized, no, that there is actually a thing called unconditional love, and it's real and it's true. And for me, that actually connects deeply with my faith and my spirituality as somebody who is promised this unconditional love in the way that I process and experience religion and faith. And I give thanks for my children, because I didn't know that was impossible, because now I know there's essentially 0 things that the 3 children can ever do that would make me stop loving them, even if they were like heinous, horrible crimes against humanity. And I would be so heartbroken and disappointed for, like, obviously the blast radius of whoever they hurt or whatever that looked like. But ultimately, there's absolutely nothing those 3 people on this planet could do that would make me stop loving them. I might not agree with the behavior, but I will always love their souls. So that's the truest thing I know, that unconditional love is possible in this world.
Wow. May I reflect a couple of things back?
Yes.
First of all, thank you for that answer and for digging in. I was struck with two things as you were sharing that answer. One, I in a lot of my work and a lot of my songwriting, I've kind of advocated for the concept of forgiveness. I have a song called Forgiveness that I wrote about a man whose son was brutally kidnapped and murdered in Iraq, this whole thing. And he chose to forgive the man that had killed his son. And I've become a collector of stories of forgiveness just by having put that song out in the world. People have shared them with me, just some unbelievable stories. There was another man whose his son was killed in a break and entering, and he wrote to the person that had killed his son in jail. And at first the guy was like, screw you, and didn't write him back. Like, I don't want anything to do with you. And I'll fast forward the story, but basically this guy kept writing and said, I forgive you. I want to know you. And eventually petitioned for this guy to get paroled and get out of jail. And now the two of them go around to schools together and gives talks. And this guy comes over for Christmas dinner. And so, what your answer just sort of reminded me of is to not ever give up on people. And at the same time, what you also said about your sort of struggle around unconditional love, with others, I'm also doing a course right now with Terry Real, who's a kind of really well-known therapist. I'm doing a 10-week course with him, and he opened the last session saying there's no such thing as unconditional love, from adult to adult. Basically, we all have a limit, and we all have a line, and that's actually healthy in a sense. But the love between parent and child doesn't fall under that those same conditions, and so. But yet I'm sort of seeing a bridge between those two things where there's boundaries that are required with other humans that are not our children. And if we can still in our heart and soul, just never give up on people, and it doesn't mean that they're in our lives anymore because maybe they've crossed a line that's no longer healthy for us, but there's something about the energy and the love that you just described for your kids that I think is a lesson for all of us around just compassion and hope-filledness in a way for humanity and for other human beings that I get from your message. So thank you.
Oh, what powerful words, Peter. Thank you for even just, you said, I'm a collector of stories of forgiveness. You're a collector of stories of forgiveness. And I'm super mindful of our time. And what's so important to me is that people can build in some time with you and I, into that, manageable chunk, because I appreciate people are so busy and your time is your most precious resource. So I want you to use it wisely. Is this kind of closing piece, so to speak, if it's okay, about just recognizing that, maybe sometimes that forgiveness, that where we need to channel that might actually be to ourselves. And it's okay, speaking about that authenticity and showing up and how are you really doing? Perhaps we can just hold space for, and maybe even invite people to think about, maybe it's time you let it go. And I always believe that the world is kind of, it works in our favor. I believe that. I believe if it's meant for you, it will find you. And my intention that I'm putting out right now is that if somebody has just been kind of waiting to be okay, when is it going to be the right time to forgive myself? Maybe it's now. Why not now? Maybe now.
Maybe it just takes a breath.
Just a breath. Yeah. So maybe what I'm really feeling again in my heart is that maybe it's time that we can forgive ourselves, whatever that might be, whatever, and maybe that unconditional love, we can let that flow back to ourselves. We're the relationship that we're going to have for the longest time is the relationship you have with yourself. And maybe we can invite people as their their takeaway or that little moment of reflection of maybe we can cultivate a little bit of that forgiveness. Maybe it's time that we try something different.
I think it's time. Thanks, Robyne.
I think it's time.
This has been a beautiful conversation. So I know our promise to people is 30 minutes, but there's the occasional bonus minutes. So wherever this lands.
Extra time.
Extra time. But
Extra time.
thank you for going on this journey together. This has been beautiful. Thanks to all of you listening. Hopefully there's been some value for you. And I for one, would love to hear anything from your biggest takeaway from today, or what is the moment that you're forgiving yourself. Is this the moment, or whatever might have emerged for you as you were listening? We certainly would love to know. And if you have any questions or any things that you'd love for us to cover in the future, then we certainly would be happy to hear that.
Oh, so good. Good. My friends, take good care. Thank you for joining us. Again, your time is precious, and we're honored that you spent it with us. And we look forward to catching you again soon. So in the meantime, take good care.
See ya.
Bye.